I'm reading a book called Return with Honor, written by Medal of Honor recipient Colonel George Bud Day. Colonel Day's book went into great detail about the detention of hundreds of POWs in Wallow Prison in Vietnam. I vaguely remember Colonel Collins' story from when I first read the book 27 years ago. So I immediately grabbed Colonel Day's book from the bookshelf and started thumbing through its many dog-eared pages. And found a passage about Colonel Collins from over 50 years ago. It's an unforgettable story, one of the many he describes in his new book, Out of the Blue. Sir, I read your book last fall, it was fantastic. So before I called Colonel Collins, I researched him a little more online and learned that he loved music. He played the saxophone, piano, and other instruments at school and church groups. He composed for voice and instrument. He was also a drum major at the Citadel. He got the flying bug of the boy from flying small prop planes with his dad. He later got his Air Force wings and was able to fly some of the coolest jets in the inventory. The F-86 Sabre, the F-104 Starfighter, and the F-105 Thunder Chief. So when I called Colonel Collins, I wasn't sure what I was going to say. At the very least, I hope to meet him and thank him for his service to our country. We talked and laughed about music, flying assignments, fighter pilot stories, deployments to various bases around the world. And then we got down to the really important stuff. What do you like better, theater or the hard stuff? I found out that Colonel Collins is a good martini guy, very drunk. And then we both brag about the wonderful women in our lives and how lucky we are to be with them. We did a little more hangar flying, and then he got down to business. Colonel Collins said, I'm selling a book and I'm looking for a place to sell it. So I said, we've got just the room for you. So here we are. As you'll learn in a few minutes, he's one of the many military veterans who continue to serve our country long after they've hung up their uniform. He continues to share, inspire, and educate young and old about patriotism in our country through the work of his Carolina Freedom Foundation. Sir, I met Colonel Day in 1995 at Maxwell Air Force Base, one of your old stomping grounds. He and Colonel Roger Hugh Donlin and Chief Warrant Officer Michael Novosel, all Medal of Honor recipients, were featured speakers at a Medal of Honor symposium. My friend Laney and I had the privilege of sitting with him and his wife Doris for lunch, and Colonel Day was kind enough to give Laney and I copies of his book. One of Colonel Day's stories that day was about a man who lifted the Wallow POW spirits in a fantastic and novel way. He was talking about you, sir. What you did helped with morale and restored them to many POWs who either witnessed what you did that day in 1967 or heard about it in tap-coded messages sent through the concrete prison walls. Colonel Day said that you and what you did with your gift was an inspiration to everyone in Wallow. You indeed helped many return with honor to the United States of America. So back to the Colonel Day's description of Colonel Collins. It was on dog-eared page 108. When I read it, I started getting what one of my Marine friends calls sweaty eyes. Sir, I can't read Colonel Day's full description of what he wrote about you, because it would steal your thunder. But here's how it ended. Quincy was a great musical talent, a good POW, and a fine American. And if you've ever met Colonel Bud Day, that is indeed great praise. Many men survived Wallow because of Colonel Collins' leadership, selflessness, and bravery. They tried to keep up each other's morale with the ultimate goal being to return home with honor. But Colonel Collins went above and beyond in a very unique ways to lead, support, love, and encourage his friends in the face of unspeakable adversity. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Mrs. Catherine Collins. It was a pleasure meeting you this morning and spending some time with you. I can't thank you enough from everyone here for spending time with us. So let us all give a warm Carolina Orchards welcome to Mrs. Catherine Collins.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to introduce Quincy, who is my husband.
Say that a little loud.
My husband of about 40 years. Quincy Collins was born on the 4th of July in 1931. Now, I'm sure you all are doing a little calculating. He is 21 years old. Go. Was raised in Concord, North Carolina, and we were just in Columbia, South Carolina. So I had to say he was born in Winsboro, South Carolina. But all of us, well, that's right, this is Fort Mill, South Carolina. Okay. He still spent most of his in Concord, North Carolina. He graduated from Concord High School, where he was drum major, as well as at the Citadel. He did attend the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in commerce in 1953. He immediately entered the Air Force as a second lieutenant and began pilot training. 21 years later, he had accumulated over 3,000 hours of jet time with a command pilot rating and had flown all the jet fighters. 1955, Quincy was selected with 7 others ATOs, not the fraternity that you think of, but that ATO stands for Air Training Officers. These 70 men were selected to help the incoming cadets at the Air Force Academy, because there were no upperclassmen there. So these air training officers acted as upperclassmen for 3 years. Quincy later earned his jump wings at Fort Benning. And in case you don't know Fort Benning, Georgia. Just tap that down. And while a flight commander in an F-104 unit at George Air Force Base, California. And Quincy now resides in Charlotte. And with me, we live in a retirement community. Very similar to Del Webb, not quite as clean. This is the cleanest place I've ever seen. So I know you all enjoy it. And now I'm going to turn you over to Quincy. And he is going to read several chapters from the book.
When you train us, when you ride, you don't have to worry about it anymore. That is the finest of the five. Well, let's see, it's got a green light, right? Green light's good. Is that not picking up?
You guys hear him all right?
Yeah. Picking up, okay. Anytime that you do something, write a book, write a song, this, that, or the other, but you're placing yourself out where there's a lot of comment that could be made about you. Same situation in prison. I ended up in my Air Force career as the first Protestant fire master at the Air Force Academy. General Stillman walked in my office one day and said, "Quincy, do you know we forgot something?" I said, what is that, sir? Now, Moose Stillman was the first All-American football player out of West Point. He was a big guy. He was also shot down over the Pulaski oil fields and spent. I told him that he didn't spend enough time to really be a POW, that you had to have at least 8 years. But at any rate, he discarded that. But he told me, he says, "Yeah, we forgot about having a Protestant choir director. Now, I know that you can do this. Will you do this?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do this, General." And so I was, every Sunday, we alternated with the guy that I appointed as my assistant, Claire Quincy. I sang at his wedding. I guess that he was trying to get even with me. At any rate, I did, the rehearsals, and then next Sunday, Blair would be leading groups. And the general would come by my office to tell me how the program went. He was that interested. He also played the tuba and sang bass. So we had a lot of similarities in our business, and the booth was really great. And one of my chapters in here is that they decided that they would name the parade grounds the Moose Stillman Parade Grounds at the new Air Force Academy. So we all gathered up there. I mean, wherever we came from, there were hundreds of us, old cadets, people who were teaching, all that sort of thing. So we all gathered. They marched all the kids down, and they're out there on the field, and they're just about to announce the flyby. And you heard, you know how it is if you use a mic like this, you get a lot of background stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going, and you could hear them saying, "Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. What the hell is this? Maybe they will, maybe they won't." At any rate, the announcer came on and says, "We're so sorry to announce that the weather at the point of origin for the flyby is too bad for the aircraft to take off, so the flyby is hereby canceled. At that very moment, from that end of the field came a flock of geese. Perfect V formation. They flew up the entire field and peeled off. And we all said, damn, Moose has arranged his own. The guy. Well, it takes me back to this book because I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't think I had enough stuff to put in. Well, that was wrong. You want to start writing a book, start, and you're going to find that it just keeps gushing out of you. It will be easy for all of you guys and gals to write your own book, write your own story. Here is the first chapter I'm going to read to you. Chapter 5. When you gotta go, you gotta go. Now I named each chapter. I gave it a title to give you a little bit of, fooling with your mind as to what is this all about. So I'm gonna put on my eyes here. When you gotta go, you gotta go. Chapter 5. Have you ever tried to go back in your life as far as you can remember? This is a perfect exercise to spend time on when you're in prison and are in that monotonous waiting period between interrogations and torture and the unknown. First, it takes you away from the present and places you at a time frame years ago when things were perhaps a little more pleasant, at least different. Second, it causes you to dig into your brain and dredge out those memories that are hidden from normal recall. Some may be embarrassing to you now as an adult and may unconsciously be repressed so that the world will never know what unseemly act you committed. After all, of what importance is some past atrocious deed that is only remembered by your family, their friends, or other close neighbors? One thing is sure, these people are old. Really old, and cannot be relied on for the facts unless what happened was funny, a disaster, or some completely unexpected occurrence. We all have them, and now it is my time to look back. Episode 1. After combing my past and trying to look critically at some of the early events that shaped or maybe warped my life, I've come to one conclusion. From birth to about 3 years old, everything that happened to me involved doo-doo. My God, I hate to admit this, but it's true. Potty training must have been a bear for my parents. I apparently manufactured a lot of this stuff and it had to go somewhere. This brings me to my very first recollection. I must have been 2 or 3 years old. At least upon closer examination, I believe I was still in diapers. Mom had enrolled me in some kind of school so she could get a break from the antics and normal body functions of yours truly. I can see the location very clearly right now. A little driveway that came off of Church Street in Concord and led up to this delightful white house that looked like a drawing from a kid's book. Across the street from the entrance was Coltrane Grammar School. That always got my attention because I wanted to go there when I got bigger. I never did. I mean, I did get bigger, but I never went there because Clara Harris Grammar School got this big guy instead. And I later made my mark there. But back to the quaint little White House with all the kids running around wild. My mother had dropped me off on this particular day because she was probably driving to Charlotte to shop. These items I do not recall, but they appear to be logical conclusions on my part. I was obviously still in diapers and had evidently dumped about 5 pounds of you know what into a diaper that only held about a pound. So I was in trouble. In fact, everyone around me was in trouble. The lady in charge called my dad at his furniture store to come get me because, quote, my cup was running over, unquote. And just changing my diaper wasn't going to handle the situation. Dad did what every successful executive would do. He told one of his trusted lieutenants, in other words, another salesman, to go pick me up and bring me to the store. Ben Craven was this man's name, and I remember him well. I think Dad selected Ben because he always had a pipe in his mouth and smoke encircled him wherever he went. His bad habit would alleviate any odors that might otherwise be debilitating. Ben arrived in his pickup delivery truck to transport baby Dumpling Collins back to the store. Yep, that pipe was really working overtime, especially after he saw my condition and began planning on how he was going to handle this mess. The Concord Tribune newspaper provided the answer. I was placed between the front page headlines and the obituaries, rolled up like a homemade cigarette, and into his arms I went. Somehow Ben got his package loaded into the front seat and drove back to Maxwell Brothers and Collins Furniture Store. All of Dad's employees, from secretaries to warehouse people, were waiting to greet me and also to pat Ben on the back for a job well done. But I don't think anyone wanted to touch Ben under the circumstances. The rest of this story was told to me later, especially when I became a more sophisticated teenager and thought I was a real ladies' man. These kinds of moments can whittle away at your image and expose things that should be forgotten. It never was. Now, that's one way to slip into this thing. I'm going to chapter 12. this is called the date that haunts me. This woman was beautiful. Her spirit was enticing. Her manners impeccable. And her eyes were sparkling. One gorgeous woman. I met her at a high school band clinic in Salisbury, North Carolina. She played alto saxophone. I played baritone sax. So we were in the same section and certainly had a lot of eye contact with each other, especially when actually playing. Have you ever tried to smile at someone while biting down on a mouthpiece and reading music? I learned to master this task at that band clinic in Salisbury. Jane and I became good friends and hung out together at every break in rehearsal and at several special events scheduled during our 3-day clinic. I had built up a huge desire to bring Jane into my life, even though she lived in what we call Canopolis, Naples, and I in Concord, accent on both syllables. Even Duke and Chapel Hill couldn't compete with the rivalry between the Concord Spiders and the Little Wonders of A.L. Brown High School. But here I was, trying to bridge that gap romantically. Well, the conclusion came at the final concert of the clinic, when mothers, fathers, family, friends, and others drove in for the final concert, including Jane's high school boyfriend that I didn't know existed. During the concert, my eye contact with Jane kept building until the crescendo of the final theme almost made me cry. Then the volume faded as the audience rose in acclamation. But my little tune with Jane was over as we departed on our separate paths. All of this occurred in 1948. Fast forward to Christmas leave from the rigors of military training at the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. Our hero, namely me, had just completed the first semester of this 4th class system, Hell Week. But after a whole semester of this, I was ready to have something glamorous happen to my life. Jane came into my mind, even though I had not been in contact with her since the band clinic in Salisbury. But I had the hope that yesterday's boyfriend was now in the missing persons file. But I had the hope that yesterday's boyfriend was really in that missing persons file. Perhaps now there was an opportunity for me to enter her arena with a herald of trumpets. When I reached home on vacation, I started searching for any clue that might lead me to Lady Jane. It was tough. I could not for the life of me remember her last name. After much research, guessed, and jumped into conclusions, I ended up with a telephone number in Canopolis. That was all I needed. Concord College students always had a Christmas dance at the Concord Hotel. So this was to be my piece of cheese to get this darling little mouse to say yes and into my arms again. With my heart in my throat, I dialed the number. I had hoped for a lot of rings so I could settle down a bit. But someone picked up on the very first ring. It is Jane there, I mumbled. Just a minute, the voice replied. Now I'm hooked. I thought the next voice I hear will be hers. I became more nervous and uncertain. My confidence was fading on me. And the luring voice said, "Hello." Wow, it was her. And I was at bat. I told her who I was. She acknowledged remembering me as Mr. Music and the strutting drum major of Concord High. I had already reasoned that I didn't want to bring up the music clinic because of the boyfriend. So I got right to the point and asked her for a date for the dance. She didn't hesitate. Yes, of course, she said. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Woo! As I hung up the phone, weak and trembling, my mom rounded the corner and asked what my problem was. I told her that I'd just made a date with an angel. The day of the dance arrived. I had worked on my car until I'd rubbed the chrome off the front bumper. I'd also ordered a corsage from Mrs. Mills at the floral shop and had put it in the fridge to keep it fresh. There was no map west back then, so I meticulously planned the drive to her home like General Eisenhower planned the D-Day invasion at Normandy. The time arrived for me to leave. Mom and Dad said what they always said. Be careful. Off I went like a herd of turtles. I arrived right on time, rang the doorbell, and stood back thinking how wise and resourceful I had been in making all these arrangements. The door opened and an attractive mother-like lady said, "You must be Quincy." I owned up to that and gave her the corsage to pass along to Jane. After she left the room, I edged over to the beautiful piano in the living room. I play piano by ear, so I sat down and started playing one of my favorite romantic songs, Tenderly. I mean, I really got into playing this song. I could have been playing opening night at Carnegie Hall. I mean, I was doing all the good stuff, you know. I was at the high point when I heard the door open. I wheeled about like Liberace at a concert. I came to my feet if I could get up. Wait, Jamie. I came to my feet as if I had been given an order to stand at attention. There, in front of me, was a girl I had never seen before. And her name was Jane. Wow. I must have looked like they took my lottery winnings away from me. I was dumbfounded, but quickly decided that right then was not the time to be honest, forthright, you know, all that good stuff should be. Well, I elected to play the role I had created. I got away with it until about an hour into the dance, when Jane announced, "I'm not who you thought I was." Correct? I admitted she was right, but I'm having fun. And I hope you are too. She asked me to take her home. So we left the dance. The drive to her home was like a funeral procession, and I was the director. Silence prevailed. A nice lady was heard that evening, and it has haunted me ever since. This Jane later married a friend of mine in Concord. Small world, isn't it? Now, I'm going to chapter 32. Page 27. Chapter 32 is titled "The Citadel Ring and the Beginning of the End." Do you know how to tell if the world's greatest fighter pilot is in the same room with you? Just listen, he'll tell you. Some of you have married an old fighter pilot. Couple that with the fact that the Citadel Grad's ring hangs like an orangutan arm with a 50-pound weight on it. Well, you get the idea. It's one of the heavy loads to carry around. But best of all, it makes you aware that you have something that no one else has. A Citadel ring. And your swagger comes to life, and you walk like no other person in the room. At least that's how I see it. I was always told that our rings were the heaviest all-gold rings in the American college and university system. That fact made me feel even more distinguished, especially when I was around other grads from West Point, Annapolis, or the Air Force Academy. Those guys also got free tuition. I didn't. Damn, my family paid for me to take this crap, and man, am I glad they did. Coming to the Citadel saved my life, if for no other reason than I learned how to survive on my own terms. The fourth class system, the disciplinary regimen, and the isolation from people who did things in a normal way, and finally you had to be in total control of your emotions. Not doing so would be disastrous, and you would stand out like a naked guy at a nuns convention. But I'm getting ahead of myself. On September the 2nd, 1965, I trotted out to my F-105 at Takli, Thailand, for my third mission of the day. I had just been appointed the wing weapons officer. My job was to plan and develop the very best training program possible for our combat crews, not only in nuclear and conventional weapons delivery, but also in air-to-air combat and air-to-ground strafing operations. I had left my family at Yokota Air Base, right outside Tokyo, and then come down TDY to get as much experience as I could in the mission we had in Southeast Asia, primarily dropping bombs, rockets on selected targets and providing air coverage against enemy aircraft trying to sneak in and hit our bombing aircraft. This was my 13th mission, and we were a flight of 4. No reported flight that day on this bridge target, and that was music to my ears. So as the song says, off we go, heading to a remote spot between Laos and North Vietnam. It was a beautiful day with no cloud formation. As I lit my afterburner on the runway to get rolling, I was aware of my ring because my glove fit so tightly that it was like a surgical glove, but comfortable. And this fighting machine was ready to go. The weather was CAFB, clear as a frapping bell. That was great because it was the time of year for big billowing clouds that would go up to 40 or 50,000 feet and knock you around like a tennis ball in a professional tennis match. The description from the intelligence officer as to what kind of opposition or resistance we might encounter on this mission was no reported flight. Best news my ears could have heard, because in the last targets we hit, we had experienced a lot of flight that was threatening to us as pilots and to our aircraft. To tell the truth, it was scary as hell. As a kid growing up in Concord, I remember seeing newsreels in the local theaters that showed our bombers flying over Germany during World War II, delivering weapons on the German manufacturing complex. I always felt that these little white puffy clouds that were popping up around the aircraft were kind of pretty. But little did I realize how dangerous these little puff balls really were, because the white smoke appears in an explosion. There are thousands of pieces of shrapnel who are being projected at a very high rate out from the center of that little puff. That is what brought down the airplanes in World War II, and also the airplanes that were flying to bomb North Vietnam. If we were diving into an area to deliver weapons and saw the white fluffy balls, you can be certain that we were shaking in our boots, because the next thing would be tremendous vibration of the aircraft as we came near the explosion. You just held your breath that the shrapnel would miss you. This little distraction, along with trying to follow your instruments, just arming the weapon and watching your delivery systems get you busy as hell in the cockpit. There was not time to be thinking of other things. The final part of our flight briefing was a description of the armament we were carrying and a brief of exactly how we were to deliver these weapons. Today, the target was a bridge over a small river at a point where Laos and North Vietnam came together. I had already flown missions that day using the same delivery techniques, so I was not concerned at all about that part of the mission. Plus, there was no reported flight and the weather was clear. What more could a fighter pilot ask for? Our 4 F-105s lined up in formation on the runway. A nod of the lead's head indicated we should push the throttle up while holding the brakes and check our engine operating gauges. We had been briefed on a single ship takeoff because we were carrying a lot of 750-pound bombs under each wing, rockets, and a full load of fuel, so safety was our #1 concern. Finally, Lee released his brakes, went into afterburner and accelerated down the runway. The afterburner coming on was a real kick in the pants as it pushed you back into your seat, and the aircraft immediately accelerated. 8 seconds later, each of us, in turn, would do the exact same thing until we were all airborne and climbing out to our established altitude. We kept in a very loose formation until the lead motioned for us to get in closer so that we could check each other's aircraft and weapons. After that was completed, we slid out again. All was well, and now we could think about was our ETA, our estimated time of arrival at the target. I had set up my Doppler navigation system after I started my engine. The F-105 is a single engine aircraft for a single pilot. So my home base was now set, plus our first checkpoint where we crossed the Mekong River, and then the target. The Doppler system was very active. We needed it because the jungles below hid any way of telling where you were. An arrow in the cockpit pointed directly at the target, and another window showed the mileage to go. My airplane was a Cadillac in the sky. But about 50 miles out from the target, I saw something that tied my stomach in a knot and caused my heart to begin pounding. I spotted newly uncovered ground close to the target, and that really concerned me. Why was this grading necessary? If there were no anti-aircraft weapons in that area, remember, no reported flak, then why do they need earth-moving machines there? My first thought was that the enemy was preparing to defend this site, and I was their target. My answer came very shortly. It was time to get into position to start a bombing run. So I clicked the mic in the throttle to let my flight know I was rolling in. We would not use voice on the mic because using that electronic device would give away our exact position in the airspace over that target. So I banked my trusted steed, put the nose down to accelerate, and rolled into a dive to begin my run. Just as I did this, my world came apart. I was hit. I immediately saw that every instrument in the cockpit showed that everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Fire and smoke filled the cockpit. I was in trouble, deep trouble. I felt another explosion. I wasn't sure if I'd been hit again by any aircraft fire or my own bombs were going off. I went through my emergency procedures without having to think about it because I'd rehearsed them so many times. I couldn't see outside or see any of my instruments at this time. Was I upside down, nose up, on my back? I didn't know. I gave myself an order that was tough to take. Get the hell out of here. Boom! The aircraft shook like I'd been hit again. I was sitting in an ejection seat, so I reached for the handles that were on either armrest. Pulling these handles would blow the canopy off and expose triggers on each armrest that, when fired, would launch me in my rocket seat to safety above the airspace in the aircraft. I recall quite clearly that all my actions seemed to be in low motion. But I never remembered whether I left the aircraft by ejecting or because the plane exploded. I do know one thing. I had to have been doing over 700 knots when I ejected and hit the airstream, because my body later looked like I had been dumped into a cement mixture and dropped from Mount Everest. When I finally opened my eyes after regaining consciousness, I was sitting, leaning against a tree with nothing on but my shorts. Across from me were 4 ancient mariners, old militiamen protecting their part of Vietnam. There was no parachute, no ejection seat, no flight suit, no boots, no pistol or survival mat. God, I was just about naked in the jungles of Laos or North Vietnam, and I was alone. No rescue aircraft circling, no choppers hovering close by. So I took stock of myself. I had 2 arms, but I could only see one leg. Damn! My left leg was bent grotesquely out to the left. I could clearly see that it was broken in several places above the knee. It made me sick to see that I did not have the means to escape. I wasn't going anywhere. I guess every nerve ending in my body was on alert, because I hurt. God, did I hurt. And I only had my mind to throw up against it. I looked down at my right arm and hand, and my ring was gone. One of those old bastards had my citadel ring, my watch, and they were gone forever. I pointed to my leg, and my captors came over to see more closely. They conversed excitedly and then began to move my left leg back to its normal position. I became unglued at this point because the pain was more than I could bear. In fact, it was so intense I could not concentrate on what they were doing. Eventually, they wrapped vine around my entire left leg, put me in a net with poles on their shoulders, and carried me to a Russian Jeep-type vehicle and literally threw me into the rear compartment. I was holding on to my left leg because I thought it might tear off. I felt the vehicle crank up and start to drive away. Where were we going? What would they do to me? What kind of enemy had captured me? One thing I did know, I was in a world of hurt, and these guys were in control. My life was in their hands. God help me. And as soon as my captors threw me into the rear compartment of their Russian Jeep, all of my bodily functions erupted all at once. You name it, I did it. And the stench was strong and foul and sickening. It was as if the whole world stunk and I couldn't get away from it. My face was in it. The shorts I had on were caked with it. I tasted it. All I could do was yell, and I mean loudly, "Hospital, hospital, hospital!" And my captors responded, "Okay, okay." The thought came to me that maybe, just maybe, I was not the first American this bunch had ever captured, but what the hell could I do about it? but the Jeep began to slow. I couldn't tell if it was because darkness was about to envelop us and it was more difficult to see where we were going, or if we were actually getting closer to our destination and a slower speed was warranted. At any rate, we finally came to a complete stop, and my captors began to jabber and goof as if discussing how to unload me without touching this stinking passenger, and it made me more than a little uncomfortable. My moans and groans were not loud enough to deaden the sound coming from a very high waterfall hitting big rocks and boulders not far from where my aching body lay. Eventually, they slid me out of the Jeep, wrapped more vines around me, and hoisted me into their shoulders and began to descend towards the powerful sound I had been hearing. Immediately, I envisioned this as being my last seconds alive, and my entire life began flicking in front of me like an old tuned movie film. It was truly amazing that this could be happening. I had heard of this phenomenon, but had never experienced it. This selection of visions that appeared to me was also amazing. My earliest years, something from yesterday, or earlier today, people I had not thought about in years, on and on they came, and what about how I was about to die. As if on cue, my burial train took a right turn. I got a second breath. The vision ceased, and they carried me into a small building. The sound of water falling on rocks did not end, but now there would be a different ending to this part of the story. Yes, I was still hurting more than ever, and my captors gave me another shot of morphine. I wasn't the least bit concerned about becoming an addict at this point. All I wanted was to rid myself of the physical hurting and mental devastation I was experiencing. Now the enemy wanted to get out of business. They wanted me to operate my emergency radio to lead rescuers to our site so that they could be destroyed. Fortunately, I didn't remain conscious long enough for my goons to complete their plan. I guess they thought, well, tomorrow is another day. It came too soon for me as I sank into unconsciousness again and more vivid visions. But this time, they were of my beloved. Man. God, how many times do I have to go over that? But it's worth going. It gives me a renewed vigor to fight on. Guys and gals, our nation is in the deepest trouble it has ever been. I can't believe what our own chairman of the Joint Chiefs is doing. Nothing. We still have people out there fighting, losing their lives every day. For what? Somebody better get hold of America. Straighten out this. Now, I want to open up for your questions, a little Q&A. If I have prompted anything that you might want to ask, and I mean anything, I don't care what it is. I'm old enough to handle it now. Yes, sir.
My father, he flew out of Toppy at the same time you were there. I was just wondering, You recognize the name Robert Taspet or George Acree.
Acree.
He was a weasel at a copy.
Yeah.
And he threw, my father threw with Chuck Corner.
I know
Sure,
that
everybody heard
name.
of him. And he was mentioned in a book. My dad didn't tell me any of the stories. I had to hear about him in books and online tail number databases and things like that. And
But you've got to remember that every night, Hanoi Hannah, who took Tokyo Roses, part of World War II, Hanoi Hannah read the names of everybody who was killed, captured, injured, or whatever that day. It was thrown into your face.
did you know Bobby Purcell?
Yes,
Prison?
yes.
He was my father's good friend.
Okay, he was a good man.
Gentleman
guy.
Mart, Marty Mart.
I don't remember that.
He's my godfather. Excuse me. He was captured, I'm sorry, he was shot down and picked up in Laos. My dad supposedly was shot down, but I read later that he had a collision with a forward air control. And that's how he was done. He was also rescued. They were the two loved ones.
See, there are all kinds of connections. And when we came back, like at actual Air Force Base, they grilled us for hours, getting names, people we'd never heard of the name. We were trying to put together all these things. And it wasn't fun, but it was something that we felt was necessary, because we left about as many people over there as came out. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Have you been back there since?
No, Southern, you couldn't get my ass back. I became the protege, if you will, of the guy who was in charge in my book. Here is the rabbit. That son of a BYPU, he would just soon kill you to say hello to. And I remember when we were leaving, we were on the way out. We were out at Elam Airport, getting ready to sign a piece of paper and get on this airplane and fly over to Clark Air Base. And so we waited for the rabbit, that's who he was, for the rabbit to call our goop name. My goop name was Kong. And I would beat my chest and say, King Kong. They didn't like that. And so when they called my name and I went up to the table out at the airport to sign my John Henry that I'm leaving, I looked up at the rabbit. I had never called him the rabbit, but I looked at him and I said, Rabbit, the best part about this is I get to leave, but your butt's gotta stay. And I thought, oh, why did I say that? So I looked, there was an Air Force colonel standing with a color guard over here. And I double timed over him to get him on that airplane, because the rabbit could change his mind. And I knew he could do that too. I wanted to get the hell out, and that's why I ain't ever going back. I don't want him to know where I am. And they kept telling us, folks, when this thing is over and we want to get to you, we know already how to do that. Now, that's a hell of a message to be giving somebody as they're about to leave 8 years worth of BS in their life. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I remember seeing a picture of a reunion, I think it was when President Nixon was in the White House.
Yes,
Do you guys get together very often, or have you seen many of these guys, an organized thing?
we're having our next reunion at the Nixon Library next month. That will probably be our last reunion. But yes, we do, and little groups will get together because there's some of the Navy guys will find that they're in a certain place, and Air Force, same thing. Yes, sir.
Were you briefed or did you monitor guard frequency for missile launches in North Vietnam?
No, because I was single fighter, I didn't have a radar guy or anything like that. Now, some of the other aircraft had observers and people that were following all of the broadcasts. I just didn't have that.
I was told that we broadcast on guard channel the status of missiles in North Vietnam, both when the radars came up and when the missile was actually launched. And it was a grid system in North Vietnam to locate which sites they were using. And the guys in the back of the airplane I was flying told us the status of the missiles in the SAM missiles. And we broadcast on guard where they were and the status of the missiles and when they were being fired.
Well, there were B-66s, did nothing more than tune into all channels. I am in Charlotte, out in my backyard, this neighbor that I rarely said hello to came out and he said, "Colonel, I was up flying the day you were shot down." Where does this go? He said, "Yeah, I was on some mission and they had their missions all coded. But I had no idea." He said, I heard them calling your aircraft out." And he was telling me my call sign, and I didn't even remember that. But there were a lot of things like that were going on that I suppose it would have been comforting to me to know that somebody knew that I was down, but nobody came. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yes, I was a little bit late, I'm sorry. You had in the book that you were at Sampson Air Force Base?
Yes, sir.
When, what year? Because I was there in 1952, that's why I asked.
It was 53.
You went right after I did. I went
Yes, sir.
52, and then from Sampson, I went to Lowry Air Force Base for armament school,
Okay,
right? You went to armament, you were in Lowry, I believe, also.
that was later on when Lowry became the new Air Force Academy at Lowry.
When did you fly 86s, Sabre jets?
Started in 55.
All right, so because when I got overseas, well, I was back from overseas, Korea. When I went overseas in 54, Korea, we had 84s, and then the 86s came in after. And then when I came back to Wrightstown, McGuire, we had the 86s there, but they were the 86Bs. They didn't have any.
Did you guys have in the F-84s, you have that sniffle valve that would not allow you to get airborne until you sniffed ground at the end of the runway.
They had everything on that plane. That was an armor's nightmare. There was 1250 machine guns on it. We
I-
put
I
500
never-
pounds
I
or
never had
thousands,
the opportunity.
napalms, it was, but then the 86 came after it. But the Ds, the 86Ds were strictly pods with like, your rockets. And we went to Yuma to, in other words, to hit something, and it was hit the planes. And the gun sights were terrible. And what the pilots were doing, instead of using gun sights, they were taking chewing gum, sticking on the windshield, and using that to shoot at. So I didn't know if you had came to Korea or not, or was that?
Well,
But I want to say one thing, God bless you, I'm happy that you're here.
I'm happy to be here. One of the more interesting things was after command staff school. I signed up for fighters again. And I got F-104s at Victorville, which is Roy Rogers' home. Victorville is where Roy Rogers' museum is and where his horse is, and hats and guns and all that. Georgia. Yeah. But one of the more interesting things is when I reported in to George Air Force Base, there wasn't a damn airplane on base. I mean, nothing. And I stopped because I had different wife, same kids, but I wanted them to see what Dad was going to be flying. And so I stopped this airman. I said, "Where are the airplanes?" He says, "They're down in Florida pulling alert in case Castro decides to launch missiles," and so forth. And then I got checked out in the F-104. I was testing all of the ones that they were bringing back that they would find things wrong with, and during that time, we practiced what we called a zoom maneuver, and that's what brought down at least one of these balloons that our administration allowed to fly over big USA and take all the pictures they wanted. And that really involved getting that starfighter, which was really an engine, and then you put a saddle on it, and that was it. And you get about 40,000 feet, and you're in afterburner, and you're going through Mach 2, that's twice the speed of sound, and then you just pull it up, and you just hold it there. Your flying instruments, because you can't see the damn thing, everything up here is black. And so you just hold that right there, and all of a sudden, your feet, boom, you hear all these explosions. And they're pouring gas into your cylinders in that airplane, into your afterburner. And there's just a little bit of oxygen available to ignite, and that explosion would knock your feet off the ground, and you're sitting there thinking, "What the hell are you doing?" And you're already probably, you couldn't keep up with it because it was unwinding, they were out temperature. You had to have been 70,000 feet, something like that. And they actually had a training program where you went 80,000 feet. And you were a missile at that point, and you just hold it because your ailerons, your rudders, nothing had any effect because it was too thin. The air was too thin for it to have any effect on your airfoil. And until that nose came down, just black up here, then when you get about here, you see the curvature of the earth. Now, that is thrilling. It's thrilling, but it's really thrilling when you think about damn engine to crank up. And you can't get that engine cranked up until you got that nose pointed down and it begins to turn and you've got enough oxygen back there to push you. Now, I know I've spent a lot of time doing this. One more question.
I was told one time that if you did a dead stick landing in a 104, that you started your flare at 1,500 feet.
Number one, I doubt that you could do without the engine because your controls and everything operated off of oil. And if you lost oil, you had no. And F-104 had an automatic stall, anti-stall system. So if you pull too much, it would dump your nose. But if you're not where there's enough air to do any good, it didn't make any difference what that did. But you know, initially, the F-104 had downward ejections. And when you were taking off and had a problem, you had to roll over like this and eject this way. Fortunately, I came along a little bit after that. I was fortunate that I really appreciate your
You wanted me to remind you, sir, Bob Hope story?
Bob Hope. Well, I have.
Is that correct? Because you were pretty famous when you got to the Camden.
Everybody is interested in Bob. Bob and I became good friends. And I appreciate your reminding me. Okay. Special Christmas call to Bob Hope. December the 25th, 1973, San Francisco. Hello, Bob. Hello, Dolores. I'm Quincy Collins. You may remember bumping into me at one of the many POW Veteran Appreciation celebrations in the past couple of months. If you don't recall, maybe this little song will refresh your memory. And so I sang the POW hymn that I wrote when I was in solitary confinement over a period of a year in prison. And it went something like this. Oh God, to thee we raise this prayer and sing from within these far imprisoned walls. We're men who wear the gold and silver wings and proudly heed our nation's call. Give us strength to withstand all the harm of the rights they know well we are due. We pledge unswerving faith and loyalty to our cause, America and thee. Amen. I want to say, I don't know if you got a chance to hear our POW hymn in May at the White House, but some of us sang it that night, Bob. But that was the first time I had ever seen you in hip boots and a tux. Man, didn't it rain? It had rained for about 3 weeks prior to the Nixon dinner at the White House. They put up the largest tent ever installed at the White House and had more people invited to dinner and cocktails than had ever been invited at the White House. And it was really something messy, to say the least. I'm in San Francisco to spend a part of this Christmas season with my 3 sons, Chip, Chuck, and Courtney. We're going to get together later today and hoop it up down at the Holiday Inn at Fisherman's Wharf. You know, Bob, for many of us, this is our first Christmas at home in the good old USA in a long time. And I happen to know that your last Christmas at home with Dolores was in 1941, just about the time I was born. It was that when I started, or was that when I started losing my hair. At any rate, this Christmas should prove something to you all over again. It's easier to get laughs from a bunch of GIs than it is from your own family. Well, since this is sort of a first for you being home this season, I appreciate being able in my own small way to share a few moments of this very sacred Christmas with you and your family. A kind of turnabout is fair place routine, if you will. The serviceman, particularly overseas, always believed in Santa Claus because he knew his real name was Bob Hope. Bob, for you, since you couldn't make it to Illinois, you may recall that you were upstaged by some B-52s. Here is a song written by me in Illinois in 1969. It's just corny enough to be kind of special. Hope you enjoy it. It's called It's Christmas Again in Your Hometown. The winter winds are blowing, and in some states it's snowing. It's Christmas again in your hometown. Tom Turkey is a-cooking, and your good folks are looking to gather the family all around. The men are mixing eggnog while the girls prepare the food. And at the festive table, all heads bow in thankful mood. So vanquish care and sorrow and plan a bright tomorrow. It's Christmas again in your hometown. It's Christmas again in your hometown. Well, there are literally millions of Americans who have received a unique blessing at Christmas due to Bob's efforts. And I might add, Dolores is lost with our game. For although I can only speak officially for myself, I know I really express the sentiments of these Americans who sat on the hot sands of North Africa during World War II, or on Guam or Okinawa or in Korea, no sun and soul, just to have a little home away from home at Christmas time. You played them all, partner. Keflavik, Reykjavik, Sahara, Tornahome, and that great Berlin airlift show. And I guess every carrier in the fleet. And then there was Southeast Asia. You infiltrated that area about as much as North Vietnamese. Saigon, Da Nang, Phnom Penh, Bangkok, Korat, as the saying goes, wherever there were Americans, there was hope. Bob, I know you realize more than most that the true spirit of Christmas is much more than something material. It's an attitude of love, understanding, and compassion that one human being has for another, as taught and practiced by the King of Peace, whose birthday we celebrate this day. My wish for you is that all your future Christmases will be at home. That's another way of wishing our country will always be at peace. So I say from Quincy Collins and my family, and I know also from all those Americans who will never get the chance personally. Thank you, Bob and Dolores, for some fantastically memorable times we will never forget. And what Bob hoped show would be complete without the old theme. Now, I am not Perry Como or Bing, but on the other hand, they're not me either. So I guess we're even. Mr. Hope, your song. Thanks for the memory of Christmases shared, showing someone cared, or flying to those troubled spots where no one else had dared. We thank you so much. Thanks for the memory, I think was 41, March filled in the sun. You gave a show for G.I. Joe, a legend had begun. We thank you so much. Many's the time that we waited in rain, sleet, or snow just to smile. The jokes that you told were X-rated. We did have fun and no harm done. So thanks for the memory. The rain at Cameron Bay on Algiers Cellar Day. The big red one, Da Nang was fun. The world you had to play. So thank you so much. Bob, my family and I wish you and Dolores a very Merry Christmas each day and forever. And since Bob and Dolores are no longer with us, it is very appropriate to say, thanks for memory. Yeah, for those of you who want to buy 100 or 200 books, the wife Catherine is over here and will be happy to try whatever you would like. I have signed most of the books, so you find that if you don't pre-sign some of them, you won't have a chance to do that. So come over and $35 a piece, and we take cash, take credit cards, what else? You don't take many IOUs.
They made great gifts.
They make great gifts.
So anyhow, I want to thank you again. There you go. If I might.
Yes. Great guy. And almost last morning. You're right. Yeah. Yeah.